Y'all know what it is.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's special guest is entrepreneur and leadership coach, Jeffrey Deckman. Jeffrey is a nationally recognized thought leader and award-winning author on the next evolution of business leadership, conscious leadership. His recently published book on the topic, Developing the Conscious Leadership Mindset for the 21st Century, has won a total of 4 national and international Stevie Awards and is an Amazon bestseller. He's also 2021's winner of the International Business Awards Bronze Medal for Innovator of the Year. Jeff's background is one of a serial entrepreneur, having bootstrapped 2 multi-million-dollar companies, several nonprofits, and multiple political organizations. Since 2005, he's been a leadership and organizational performance consultant and leadership coach. In that time, he's helped scores of clients grow by strengthening their leadership teams and helping them uncover, then mobilize, the hidden human capital that drives performance and profits in the 21st century. Joining us today for a conversation about developing a conscious leadership mindset, discovering the organizational trinity, the invisible force that drives all organizational performance, effectively using proven consciousness and energy shifting strategies to significantly improve relationship resiliency, and so much more. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Jeffrey Deckman.
Hey Jeffrey, how's it going?
It's going well. How's it going with you guys?
Pretty good. Thank you so much for making time for us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for including me in your podcast. I've been looking at and listening to your sessions, and they are top shelf. So I'm honored to be here with you guys.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So cool. So yeah, Jeffrey, I guess let's talk a little bit about the beginning. Let's talk about sort of your entrepreneurial journey. I know you got started quite young, and I wonder if you just sort of take us through your history a little bit and sort of how you got to doing what you're doing today.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'll tell you is that if you would have told me when I was 17 years old and getting out of high school that I would be doing what I'm doing now, I would have never believed you in 1,000 years. I was one of those guys who didn't do well academically. I was more interested in staring out the window and talking to girls than I was doing my homework and what I should be doing. I moved around a lot when I was a kid, a couple of middle schools, three high schools, and 4 years in 3 states, and I just couldn't wait to get out of school. So when I graduated, I actually had a full track scholarship that was available to me that I didn't take, and I didn't tell my parents that I had it because I didn't want them to force me to go to another 4 years of what I considered to be prison. So what I wanted to do was, my father had been in cable television literally since 1951. He was one of the first guys in the country in it. So I graduated in 74, but I spent my entire childhood being around linemen, tower workers, and to me, they were like cowboys. So I've got 3 brothers, 2 older, 1 younger, and all of us got out of high school and we went on to traveling line crews and became linemen, tower workers, etc. So I was 17 years old and climbing telephone poles and learning what life in the real world was like. So I did that I was a lineman for about 2 years. Then I went to work on an actual cable television system. And it was there that I started to getting a technical and an engineering background. And I was in North Jersey, and I worked on 2 really sophisticated cable TV systems there. And one of the most valuable lessons that I learned from that was that with the right type of teaching and training in a real world environment, you can teach anyone almost anything. Because without taking a single college class or a correspondence course, I was able to become a really top flight field engineer in the cable television industry. By the time I was about 22, 23 years old. And that was all based upon learning from other people who learned it the same way, because the industry was so new. There was not an existing workforce, and it certainly wasn't teaching this stuff in any type of trade school. So after doing that for about 7 years, I was moving up. My career was I had a company car. I was overseeing a large system, like I said, in North Jersey. And what happened was I moved so quickly up the organization, I outgrew my maturity and my patience level. because for me to take the next step meant I had to become a bit corporate and I had to be diplomatic. And that just wasn't my style. So I started bumping heads with my boss, who was a very different type of person than I was. I don't think he ever climbed a telephone pole, let alone fell off one, So he found me to be a little bit uncivilized, and I found him to be a bit unrealistic. So I decided one day, after a discussion with him, that I was going to quit. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I called one of the guys that ran a construction company, and he was doing work for me because I hired all the contractors. I oversaw the engineers and the installation staff and the contractors. So I called him up, and he was doing about $2,000 a week in revenue. He was wiring apartments. And I said, hey, look, I'm looking to get out of what I'm doing, and I want to start something new. Would you consider me as a partner? I said, I don't have any money, but I have a lot of knowledge and I know a lot of people. And after a couple of weeks, he said, sure, come on in. And I said, how much of your company would you be willing to give me? I would have come in for like 5 or 10%. It's just a little company. And he said, I'll give you half. I said, why would you give me half of your company? And he said, Jeff, I'm not making any money. I'm doing like maybe 150,000 a year in revenue. And I talked to my accountant, and my accountant said, look, if this guy knows what you say he knows, bring him in, give him half. You want him to be as motivated as possible to be able to help you build your company. And how can you go wrong? So I came on board with him. And within probably about 3 months, because of the additional services I could bring in, we ended up doing about 5,000 a week, 6,000 a week, et cetera. So while that was happening, I went to another company who did underground construction. And I said, hey, guys, let's form a third company. And it would combine the forces of both organizations. So we'll do apartment wiring, we'll do underground construction, I'll do the engineering, the designing, and that kind of stuff. We'll launch that company almost for free because we'll just use the existing companies. And if it works, that company can buy the others, and we'll see how it goes. And I mean, this was all back of the napkin kind of stuff. But we ended up making that happen. And that company ended up with offices in 4 states: Dallas, Texas, Chesapeake, Virginia. We were based out of New Jersey, and then up in Rhode Island. And we grew so fast in a period of about 7 years that we got up to about $4.5 million worth of 1987 money, which was decent. But the company grew so fast and became so complicated that it went beyond our ability to manage it. And we actually went under. We crashed. So here I am, 30 years old, 2-year-old daughter, a son on the way, a new house that I just moved into in April, and my company crashed in June. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do here? This is not good. And I had about 1.5 years of incredibly high stress trying to pull that company out of the nosedive. And I had a couple of partners, 3 partners, and man, it was just really brutal. So here I'm sitting in that position, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I can hire on somewhere. I was known in the industry, and I could have gotten a really good job. But I had this sense in me that I wasn't done yet. And that's the only way I could explain it. It was just like, I'm not done yet. And I thought, well, you just proved that you can't run a business. So why would you start another one? And the more I thought about it, I learned a really valuable lesson in decision making. And I thought, if I get a job now, I will never start another company. I'll have 2 kids. I ended up having a third. And I will look to make sure I had college money, and I would put every dime I had into establishing a future. So if I take that decision, I won't start another company. However, if I start another company, it could work. But if it doesn't, I just go and I get a job. I'm just maybe a little further in debt. So I realized that one decision allowed me to have both choices. So that's what I did. I had $17,000 I had tucked away, and I took that and I started a second company that was in the cable television industry. But in '87, I saw that the telecommunications industry was just being born. So that was voice, data, video, sound. And I was a cable television engineer. I was a video engineer, but I didn't know data and I didn't know voice. But I figured I could find some people who could help me learn how to do that. So that's what I did. I started that company in 1987, and we ended up becoming, I sold it a week before its 21st birthday to my management team. And we became one of the top integrators in New England. And all of it was done just based on trial and error, learning as you go. I learned a lot about how not to get out over my skis with certain things. So for somebody who, if you would have asked me on that day that I called my original partner, if you would ask me that morning at breakfast if I'd ever start a company, I would have said no. I would have said absolutely not. And because, I'm a high school graduate, I didn't know anything about business. But what I found is if you're good at something and you love it, and you're willing to put time and effort into it, and you learn how to deal with stress, and you have a good dose of perseverance, there's a lot of things that you can accomplish that you never thought you could. And one of the things that process told me was nobody can ever make you give up. You can decide not to do something. That's not giving up. To me, giving up is I surrender, I'm beat, I put my tail between my legs and off I go, lick my wounds and think less of myself. But if I choose not to do something, that's me being at the cause of my life. And that is me actually doing something that strengthens my character. So, obviously the bankruptcy, we had a couple of options with that. We could have went to chapter, I think it was called chapter 13 when you go for reorganization, or it might be 11. But I looked and I said, you know what, let's liquidate this thing because I wanted a free break and I wanted to go into this telecommunications industry. And so that's how I became an entrepreneur. And it's been one of the most amazing journeys of my life. I could have made a lot more money, I think, working with other people, especially in the technology field, because they were overpaying people like crazy. But I never met a guy in corporate who loved what he was doing. Yeah. They were all kind of doing time one way or another. And I had a smaller company and a smaller bank account, but I was self-determined. I decided what I did. I decided what I wasn't going to do. And I earned my successes, and I earned the beatings that I took too, and I just turned a beating into a classroom.
I love it. Well, I mean, there's a ton to unpack in there. So thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it's a really good one. And I think there's a number of things. I mean, I was sitting here scribbling notes while you were talking. I mean, one of the big takeaways for me, and I think it's because it's something that I think we may be almost transitioning out of, is this concept that you need school to be an entrepreneur, right? And I mean, I don't want to poo-poo college, and obviously people need it for a lot of things and stuff. So, just take this with a grain of salt. But what I like about your story is that it wasn't college that made the business for you. Rather, instead, it was the other way around. Like with or without college, you could have succeeded. And I think that that's really an interesting point, because I think there's a generation probably just after you and just before us that is, where college was the thing. Like, you must do college. Everybody goes to college. This is just the way we do things. And it became this idea. And then much like the time period you're describing, where this technology is sort of up and coming and innovative, and, this is the latest, greatest in tech, we're sort of in a period like that now too, where almost going to a traditional academic school, you can't really even keep up with the technology changes, right? You almost do need to learn on the job. So that value of sort of on the job training, I really appreciate you talking about, because I think a lot of people, are quick to point out, oh, I went to such and such school, and, maybe they're working in that field, maybe they're not, but nonetheless, that degree was sort of like the thing that gave them permission to go forward. Where in your story, really you slogged it out the whole time. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I also appreciate the pivot from cable to the tech, as far as like the data, the phone, and all that stuff, and how you leveraged your employees and people that you worked with to be able to enable that for you, because you might not have known, how internet works, or data, or whatever new tech you're working with, but the people around you helped out with that. And so was that pretty much, for the most part, how you were able to pivot so quickly into new technology?
Yeah, and one of the things that my lack of academic education taught me was humility. So I knew that I didn't know. And the one of the things that my cable television experience taught me was that if explained to me correctly, I can learn, I can understand, I can put it together. And I'm an applied learner. I'm not a book learner. So I had the humility to go to people who knew and say, look, would you be willing to help me with this? And I had the confidence to know that if they showed me and they spent time with me, that I could learn it and then eventually master it. And if I couldn't, I would just hire them full time and keep them. So I made a lot of arrangements with contractors and consultants, et cetera, who had that piece of the puzzle that I was missing to come in and provide that. And I paid them for it, so it was very much a win-win. And, just knowing, just having that level of humility, which was forced on me. It would have been, it just would have been totally disastrous had I not learned humility. And I think that is one of the things that has allowed, it's the gift that has kept giving me my entire career.
Well, it's interesting too
that going in and becoming a collaborator. If you're humble, you have a tendency to be a good collaborator.
Yeah. I just wanted to add on there that I think it's really interesting, the sort of, I guess the dichotomy, right? Or the gray that exists in people, right? That, we think of so many things in black and white terms, but you're sitting here describing this humility, but obviously you must have sort of a inborn hard-headedness or something that allowed you to persevere through a lot of the problems. One of the other things I took from your introduction or your story was that, despite bankruptcy, basically you were able to sort of cut threads and be resilient and recover from that. And I think for a lot of people, bankruptcy might signal the end, or maybe they don't even get to bankruptcy. They just drag it out forever and then eventually just quit, desperate and destroyed, I think there's a lot of ways that people fail and just don't recover. Right. And in your case, it's as almost if it hit you in stride, right? You were just on the way to the next thing already, right? This is kind of actually in the way. Let's just get rid of this and move past it. And so I wanted to ask you just about that resiliency and where you think that comes from, if it's something that you were taught or something sort of inborn, or maybe the New Jersey guy in you, or I don't know what it is, but maybe you can sort of help us elaborate on that, or see if there's something that we could take away from that.
Yeah. I was born with a level of hard-headedness. I'd never, my older brothers would try to beat me up and make me say uncle, and I wouldn't say uncle because that's me giving my spirit up. So I'm not giving that up. So I had that. And I'll tell you, sometimes you're in a position where like truly failure is not an option. And when that company was going down, and then, when I started my other one, there were days, Sunday evenings, I would almost want to throw up knowing what I was walking into the next day, because I'm walking into a company and I was running the New England region, and I had about 50 employees up there, and I had debt and I had stress and I had vendors and I had contracts I was trying to get, and I had vendors I was hoping I could stay off credit hold. So when I got the contract, I could afford to get the thing, and I had people issues, and you're just so far into this thing that it's you either find a way to take step by step, or it just absolutely crushes you. And it taught me perseverance, and it taught me that as long as I'm sitting at the poker table, even if I only have one chip, I'm still at the table, I can win. It's when I push away from the table that it's over, and I can push away at any time I want. But I just had this determination to stay in it until the very last breath, like until something came in and just said, you are absolutely done. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty. I made a lot of mistakes. I did it ugly, but I did it. And what I learned through that process really is I took so much of that, the ability to deal with stress management, to be in the moment, to always be looking at. I'll tell you one of the things that I learned that has served me time and time again is you're in a situation and it looks like it could go really, really bad. And what happens is we get in what I call an OODA loop. it's around it. I'm working it. It's stressing me out. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I'm getting more fatigued. I'm getting weaker just when I need to be stronger. But I can't get out of that OODA loop because I'm thinking about what if the worst case thing happens. So that scares us so much, we don't really make eye contact with it, but it haunts us. It doesn't go away. What I figured out to do is, and I've done this many times in my life since, is say, okay, wait a minute. Let's kind of take a peek behind the curtain. Let's look at worst case scenario. Like when that first company was going under, I said, okay, Jeff, what's the worst case scenario? Well, the IRS is going to come and take my house and I'm going to lose my business and I'm not going to have any money and et cetera. And I've got a wife and 2 kids. And I said, okay, well, you know what? Here's the plan. If that happens, we'll take the wife and the kids and we'll send them back to New Jersey because I was living in Rhode Island at the time. They can live with her parents. That'll work. I'll sleep in my car or I'll do something to start a business up here, but I will live. They will survive. And within a period of time, I'll come back and I'll get back on my feet. And once I really visualized what that worst case scenario was and what my solution would be, I then put it in an imaginary box, put a bow on it, and put it on an imaginary shelf. And then it was, okay, now that I've lived, I've thought through that clearly. All I'm going to do is spend all my time focusing on how do I get out of this? How do I get out of this? How do I get out of this? And then when those thoughts would come in and go, oh, but what if I don't? I would say, I don't even have to think about that because the box is there. I can open that. I have my plan. So what it did was it got me out of that time wasting experience just when I needed to maximize my time. And it got me into a place where I wasn't being crushed by the stress so that I could be more intellectual and strategic with what it was I was doing. So that whole thing of take the courage to step into that worst case scenario, think it out, maybe a couple times, but then once you do, put it in a box, put it on the shelf, because you need all your time, energy, and effort focused on getting out of the jam that you got yourself into. And that was really valuable to me.
I like the analogy of for me, I'm an audio engineer. I'll go and I'll do events with bands and musicians and stuff like that. And in audio engineering, there's feedback, and there are feedback loops where the source, like the microphone that the singer's using, is picking up the audio from the speakers and projecting it through. So it's continuing to take the signal that's getting, like he says something in the microphone, it comes out the main speakers and goes back into the microphone and loops. And it's like a problem that is well known in the industry that everyone deals with. And the way that you solve that problem is you scan through the frequencies and you find the certain frequency that's causing the issues, and you create a notch and you pull it down and delete that section of the issue. And it allows you can turn the volume up now because that little area that's causing the feedback loop is now cut out of the equation. It's all gone. And I like that kind of analogy of creating filters or notches in your day-to-day life or your feedback loop that kind of allows you to turn up the pressure on yourself but not have the problem, where you can just eliminate that one little section, that one little area that is causing you grief, and then move forward with it. So I like that. Put it in a box, take it away, get that thought out of my head, and move forward. And I just kind of like that analogy.
I'm smiling because you're reminding me of my engineering days. We used to put traps in to take out certain frequencies so that it wouldn't mess up the video. And that learning how to troubleshoot complex problems, especially intermittent problems, was some of the best training for entrepreneurialism that I've ever been through, because you just have to logically work your way through it. And no matter how mad you get, no matter how frustrated you get, no matter how much you want to stomp your feet and pull your hair out, the problem doesn't matter. It doesn't care. I mean, the problem doesn't care. It's there until you calm yourself down and you get focused and you man up or woman up and get to work on it. Because in the meantime,
find the solution. Yeah,
you just find a solution. Don't take it personal, or it's just going to cost you more time. I spent a lot of extra time hanging off of telephone poles in blizzards because I got angry, and instead of massaging something, I ripped it out, and it's like, okay, you just cost yourself 2 hours on a telephone pole, and good for you.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, just hearing you talk about this. So another note that I took in the intro that I'm just continuing to hear in your conversation is this concept of personal responsibility and really owning our decisions. You mentioned earlier that, there, like in your business or as it was on its way to decline, it was never outside of your ability to choose what to do with it, right? You never were in a situation where the choice had been taken from you. You got to choose, do we go bankruptcy and be done, or do we restructure? Do I get up in the morning and start another business, or do I go to work for somebody else? But no matter what, no matter how dire, no matter what was going on, and I think that sort of dovetails off this idea of having a plan, even if it's an imaginary one, is this idea of taking control or ownership over, or being responsible for the things that you can be responsible for. Right. Certainly there are things outside of our control, but what's within our control, we always have the choice to react however we choose to react. And like you just mentioned on the phone poll, you can react negatively and cost yourself more time, or you can react, rationally and sort of, install these traps, so to speak. And so, so I think that that's a really great thing. And I think it sort of leads into what's next, which is this idea of becoming a conscious leader. So as you transitioned in business and went on to your next venture, obviously you're in a leadership position, you're starting to grow a company. And so let's talk about sort of, I guess, that period of growth where you're building your new business, you're learning leadership structures, and then like time is happening, right? The world is changing, things are evolving, and you're having to adapt and learn new ways of leadership. And so I wonder if you talk a little bit about where this idea of being a conscious leader comes from, and then how you sort of maybe implemented it in your own practice.
Yeah, that's a multifaceted story. So, up until I was about 40, I was a typical command and control hierarchy-based leader. I mean, I wasn't a jerk about it, but, that was the structure used because that's the structure everybody's been taught, and that's just how you do it. And I was okay at it. I certainly was a jerk in my moments, and I had an ego, and who doesn't, but a little bit out of control, I think. And so what happened was when I was about 40, I went through a divorce. And if a divorce doesn't get your attention and cause you to really look at who you are, what you're doing, and how your life is going, I don't know what will. So I took a look at that because, there were problems on both sides of the equation, but her problems were not my concern. My problems, what did I do, were mine. Because if I take responsibility for something, I now get to control the outcome. If I blame it on someone else, that's a victim mentality. And a victim mentality will take you out. It's the ego, it's the liar dude going, well, it was them. And it prevents me from looking at the things that I've done that have put myself in the position. And if I've done something, I have the ability to undo something. So I like to be able to have that control. So I ended up getting on a pretty powerful spiritual path. And I had always studied multiple religions: Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, shamanism. I've studied a lot of indigenous cultures, et cetera. And I really started looking at spirituality and the ability to expand my consciousness and shift out of that ego state of mind. And what happens with that is I didn't even realize that I had an ego. I thought that I was my thoughts and my actions. I'm responsible for them, but who I am as a being is a heck of a lot wiser, smarter, and compassionate than my ego is. And when I realized that there was a separation in that, I became really interested in learning more about that conscious part of me. The inner elder is what I call it. So I'm on that journey pretty heavily for still on it in different ways, but for many years. And at the same time, I decided to get involved in politics. Right after I started my second company, the state of Rhode Island, which is where I lived at the time, licensed my entire industry out of business and gave it to the electricians and made it illegal for us telecommunication contractors to do our work. And it was just like, boom, just that quick. So we went to the state and we said, you have to grandfather us. And they said, no, we don't. It was the unions control that state. It was a union power grab. And so, long story short, we sued the state. We got a restraining order on them acting on that law. And then we had to change the law to state house, but we couldn't afford a lobbyist. So myself and another guy became a lobbyist. And you want to talk about a learning curve. Good Lord, going up into that, it was like a den of iniquity. It was just brutal. We had no idea how the game was played, and we started getting our butts kicked pretty quickly. And so we learned the game pretty quickly. But after a period of time, actually within a year, we got the law repealed. And then myself and a couple of other guys got together, actually wrote a new law, the first one in the country, and got that passed. So while I was doing that, it made me really clear that it was really important to have input on who goes into that building, who's elected. And being an engineer, I look to solve problems from the source. And I said, well, I think I want to get involved in trying to help good people get elected. Republican, Democrat, didn't matter to me. Independent, good person. I want to see if I can help them. So I got into that business for about 20 years. I ran a lot of campaigns, never ran them myself. And I got involved with a lot of government type stuff. And I started seeing how that world worked and didn't work. So after a while, I looked and I said, man, we really need a different level of leadership. And I had seen and experienced firsthand what egotistical, barbaric leadership looks like in business and in politics and in government. And as I was growing spiritually, I just looked and I said, I want to do something to push against that. And so I started developing my own body of work. And what happened was I sold my company in 2005, like I said, a week before its 21st birthday. And I spent 2 years as a political strategist just so I could pay the bills because I didn't know how to be a consultant. I mean, I was 30 years in the telecommunications industry and I didn't know how to sell thinking. I didn't know anything about being a consultant, but what I knew I wanted to do was I wanted to help other small to medium-sized business people build their businesses with less stress, aggravation, and fewer bankruptcies than I went through. I wanted to serve that community. So I jumped out and left my company and tried to make a living at that. So while I was a political strategist, I really realized that there's a lot of work that has to be done in that. We need people with a different level of consciousness, not only in business, but in politics to change the direction that the world's headed in. And I get that I'm just a snowflake in a big avalanche, but I'm okay with being that snowflake. So I ended up being invited to be a partner in a 4-person think tank from 2006 to about 2009. And what we were doing was we were looking at what changes were happening societally as a result of the new millennium and the end of the industrial age. And, we've only basically had 4 ages in human civilization: nomadic, agriculture, industrial age, and now we're in this technology or information age. So we're fundamentally in a historic period in human evolution. And I wanted to look and see what is the impact. And my focus was on leadership. What are the changes that have been made? And what I realized was one of the first things was, we've got the 5 most independent-minded generations in the history of humanity in the workforce. And none of them want to be told to shut up, sit down, and do what I tell you to. They're highly educated. They're independent thinking, especially the younger generations. They were raised having a say in what they do at home. So when they go into a company, they want to have a say there. And if you don't give them a say, first of all, you're not tapping into the collective genius and creativity that they have. So shame on you as a leader. You're wasting a resource right off the bat. People are smart. And second of all, they're not going to stay and they're not going to be engaged. So you're going to be paying them and you're not going to be getting the most amount of productivity out of them. So it makes really good sense to change a leadership style so that you can reach out, engage these people, give them a say on what's happening, and to go from command and control top down to being a leader that focuses on communication, collaboration, and facilitation. That's the role of the modern leader today. not follow me, follow my directions. We're going to take this hill and, I'm going to be the alpha dog, but more coming in. How do we do this collectively? How do we form the collaborations we need to? And kind of think a lot less about hierarchy and look at capabilities and aptitudes. What's the collective genius? And who can do what? And who's good at what? And depending upon your conditions, because conditions change, as your conditions change, who takes lead roles in certain areas should change as well to maximize your ability to stay on top. It's like trying to walk on a circus ball. That ball is doing this. And if you don't shift and adjust, you're going to fall off the ball. So with that type of a workforce that you're dealing with, and they also have a higher level of consciousness. They're not just coming in and going to work for the man or the woman and leave in 50 years. They've got a higher level of consciousness. In the world, because of technology, is changing so rapidly that our organizations have to be flexible, and we have to tap into that collective genius to help us solve the many problems that are coming. So I looked at that and I said, okay, we need a different level of consciousness as leaders. We just can't be coming in and saying, follow my directions. We have to function in a way with a level of consciousness that people will look at us, they'll respect us, and they'll follow our direction. One of the reasons the American military was so successful in World War II was because the Germans were so structured. They had to follow directions. Russian army is the same way. That's why they're having problems in Ukraine. And the minute the leader is killed, everybody freezes because they don't want to do anything the leader didn't tell them because they're going to get punished. And the Americans were much more naturally entrepreneurialistic, naturally more independent. Our culture was one of liberty and independence. So, a leader gets killed, the group reforms and it moves forward. And that's really what we have to get into now is within our organizations, we have to be fluid, we have to be agile. And as leaders and managers, we have to develop our own personal style on how to allow us to be flexible and agile and move the entire organization forward, recognizing that your workforce is a living library that knows more about the problems you have, more about the solutions, and more about how to stop the problems than any one individual will. So tap into them.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, you have to develop a different level of consciousness from ego leadership to elder leadership.
I like that.
And that's how I got there, just by seeing how bad it was, being part of that team without knowing it, and just looking. And I'm a problem solver. I'm an ex-engineer. So how do we take this on? And that's what led to the whole body of work that I basically accidentally created, but which worked.
One of the processes that you teach, I think you call it the organizational trinity, or the invisible force that drives all organizations. Is that the M3 process as well? Is it similar? Are they two different things?
That's part of the M3 process. So when I first got out, and I was in the think tank, I was focused strictly on leadership. And I ended up over about a 2.5-year period of time getting a whole series of downloads of leadership principles that would allow a leader to recognize this bigger know. It's the collective genius. I know what I know, they know what they know, and together we have a bigger know. So find that, don't shut it down, open it, activate it, etc. So it's an 8-step leadership process that I created and I teach. And I tried to write a book about that literally for 10 years, and I could never get it out. It was brutal. But while I was looking at that leadership process, I started looking deeply at organizations, and I thought, wait a minute, the org chart is just a skin over the organization. And I found just by looking at it and, my own experiences and working with my clients, I found that there are these 3 forces that drive all performance in the organization, and they hide behind the org chart because we're trained to do things by the org chart. So that's we manage by org chart. Once you get the X-ray lenses and you see through that, what I found is the 3 things that drive performance are tribal dynamics, knowledge networks, and cultures. They're each individual units, but they swirl and interact with one another, and they determine where the organization's going. So tribes real quickly. An organization isn't made up of departments. It's a tribe of tribes. An organization doesn't have a hierarchy of worker and management. They are tribes as well. And when you think about it, tribes are in our DNA. Tribes are at the source. You can't look at any organization and not see a tribe. I mean, look at tribalism in sports teams.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's actually, I hate to say this, but there's actually a reason why I buy fitted hats without I had custom order my hats that are like a baseball cap with the logo on it, but I get one without the logo because I don't want to offend clients. I don't want to offend this or that by having a Seahawks logo on my hat or this or that. You know, like I go to weddings and I'm providing audio and lighting for them. And if I'm wearing a Washington State hat and it's a Cougar bride, it's a problem, you know? And so it's like, I actually pay attention to the tribalism portion of it. And I specifically order hats that are not affiliated to any teams because of that. So,
therefore, you're able to walk into environments and not be resisted and pushed out.
Yeah, that's intentionally. That's the reason I do it.
Right.
So,
although it's like when I used to walk job sites, I was never in a suit.
So you could be approachable.
Exactly.
I could be approachable, and they didn't see me as the opposing tribe, because if you're wearing a suit, you're management. If you're management, you're not a worker. You're not a worker. You're not on our team. We don't like you. We don't trust you.
Yeah.
So tribes are the most powerful design humans ever came together to advance themselves. It's how we got from from being chased by saber-toothed tigers and barely making it out of there to being the dominant life force on the planet. So when I started studying tribes and tribal dynamics, it gave me an understanding on how to engage people and how to understand what would upset the group and how to go in and work with it. It's a very, very big part of my work. And then knowledge networks. I designed computer networks for 20 years. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that it was only about 7 years ago that I looked and I said, teams are like computer networks. They're just human networks. They're knowledge networks. So there's 4 basic components that you bring together to design a computer network. Well, what if you take those 4 components and you apply it to designing a team? Well, I started doing that, and all of a sudden, team performance went off the scale. So knowledge networks, see your organizations as tribes that function as knowledge networks. And the way you manage a computer network is the network manager isn't in there messing with it all the time. The network manager monitors, sees when there's a problem, comes in, facilitates the solution to the problem, gets back out of it, lets the network work, let the team work, and you just stand on the outside and support it. And then cultures are really interesting too. A lot of my clients say, I want a Google culture. And I say, no, you don't. First of all, it's not as cool as you think it is. That's just part of their branding. It's a nightmare. Google's a nightmare. So is Amazon. It's a nightmare. And you're not Google. So you can't possibly create a Google culture. You can create your own culture that has maybe components of what Google does that works, but every culture is customized, whether you want it or not. And you should encourage it to be customized, but just give it some parameters. When I had my construction company, I had construction people, I had finance people, I had marketing people, I had sales people, engineers, and they're all different cultures. And the way they spoke to one another were different. The finance people were more subdued. The engineers were a little bit more cocky, a little more arrogant. The construction guys, well, just they're a little rough around the edges. And I allowed all those cultures to define themselves and be who they were. I didn't expect one to be more civilized than the other to toughen up with. But what I demanded was that the basic premise of their culture was that they expressed authenticity, integrity, and respect. You can do whatever it is you want within that, but as long as you're within those boundaries, and then when we meet as a management team, well, we treat one another that way. So that's one of the important things with culture is don't try to get the culture to match some ideal that you have. Go in and see how that group is already functioning. and see if there's toxins or things that need to be shifted, and go in and work on those. But let them have their personality. They'll be happier, they'll be more productive, they'll respect you more, and they'll respond to you more.
Yeah.
So that's what that organizational trinity is: tribes, knowledge networks, and cultures. And what the M3 process is a training program. In fact, I'm just starting my first certification program on it September 14th. I'll be doing 2 a year. And what we do is we take 12 weeks and we go through my entire book, because that's the leadership mindset. We then go into the organizational trinity, because that's a new organizational model. And then we go into the leadership methods, which are the bigger no principles, because to transform anything is a 3-step process. You need a new mindset, you need new models, and you need new methods that you can implement on a like frontline basis. So that's what the M3 process is: new mindset, new models, new methods that'll transform your leadership and organization from industrial age into this more networked age.
Yeah, I love that. No, there's a million things to unpack in there. I mean, I would love to go nuts on just culture alone. I mean, it's so funny because this is one of those buzzy words you hear people talking about all the time. It's, oh, well, you have to have a great corporate culture. You have to have all this stuff, right? And I've actually not heard, and I mean, I listen to a lot of people, and Mike and I interview a lot of people. I've actually not heard anybody talk about it in the way that you can almost let a corporate culture evolve and become its own thing, right? Versus this sort of top-down approach, right? And maybe this is a relic of sort of command and control, but it's this idea that I need to install the culture and you guys need to now fit into this great culture I've created for you. And so this concept of just sort of allowing it to happen, or sort of, I guess, meeting it where it is an interesting concept, even though it seems very straightforward. It's funny because I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about it that way. But,
well, the more people get into my work, the more I tell everybody, the more you look at what I do, the more you'll realize how much you already know about it. You just didn't realize it. The stuff I do is not quantum physics. It's very intuitive. It's based on human nature. And, and it has a different level of consciousness. Command and control says, okay, I own this company. This is the culture I want. And you're going to do this like this, et cetera. Okay, well, you see how that works. Employee engagement is consistently at 30% year after year after year after year. But when you interview people, 70%, Gallup does tons of study on this. 70% of the people in organizations are not engaged in their work. It costs American companies $50 billion of lost profits every year. But when Gallup interviews those same people saying how many would like to be engaged, the numbers are crazy. 70% want to be engaged. So I look at that and I go, okay, wait a minute, put my engineering troubleshooting hat on. 70% are not, 70% want to be. And you ask management, do you want employees more engaged? They say yes. You go to the employees, do you want to be more engaged? They say yes. So I go, okay, if everybody wants to be engaged, what's the problem? It's not a people problem.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody's focusing on. They're trying to fix the people, new leadership methods, new this, more compensation. The problem is the model. We're treating organizations like they're machines. They're not, they're organisms.
Yeah.
We have linear org charts that look like assembly lines. It's an industrial age model. We have command and control, top-down leadership models. That's industrial age, right?
Well, and that's something else I wanted to touch on too, this idea of the org chart, right? You mentioned earlier that sort of the traditional way is you work to the org chart, right? You've got the sort of top-down approach. And I've heard a lot of people talk about, well, we've got to flatten the org chart, right? We flatten this thing. It's got to get flat. Everybody's on the same level, all this kind of thing. And I've always thought to myself, I'm like, okay, well, I mean, it's nice in principle, right? I mean, okay, everybody should be equal and should have a sort of an equal seat at the table, fine. But the problem with it, for me anyway, in terms of just practicality, is you still need people to step up and lead. You still need people to do this and that. And when those people take ownership of something, well, suddenly you're in a hierarchy again. You find yourself in a hierarchy. And so one of the things that actually just popped into my head, and again, this is one of those things that's very common sense, and we've talked to 100 CEOs that all have had opinions on this kind of thing. But the model that pops into my head is something more akin to like I don't know, like a spider graph or something, right? This idea that, because you mentioned this concept about people sort of rising up and, finding your collective genius, right? So in this case, I don't know, Susie is the expert on X and Jacob is the expert on Y, and we need those two things to do this. So we're going to let them sort of lead this, initiative. And then, maybe we trade them back in, and on the next job, oh, okay, well, now it's, Frank and Lisa are the leaders in this new thing. And so now we're going to go this way, right? But instead of this idea of either a pyramid or a flat line, rather it's this kind of like waveform. It's kind of this thing that ebbs and shapes and moves around as you go. And I think that is a different way, or at least different than I've heard way of approaching it, where it sort of accepts the fact that we need people to sort of step up where they can step up. But it doesn't necessarily mean I need to assert control, right? Rather, I'm leaning into the experience of somebody else, or I'm leveraging the knowledge of another person on the team. And, in this situation, they're leading. It doesn't mean that they're the manager. It doesn't mean they're in charge or any of that stuff. But I mean, as a collective, we can tap into that resource and use it. And for me, that seems like a much more natural, I guess, chart versus the old school pyramid or the flat alternative.
Yeah, well, it takes a two-dimensional model that is flat or pyramid, and it turns it into a three-dimensional model, which is like a spherical network that rotates, right? Depending on the conditions. And this is another thing. One of my partners with the think tank, in fact, I'm talking with him later on tonight. He's out of Australia. He was in the US for about 5 or 6 years, and just doing brilliant work with mega corporations and countries. And all the stuff that he does is conditions-based strategic planning. Calls it strategy and action. His name is Larry Quick. He's written a book called Disruption, which is phenomenal. And what it does is it teaches you to become an expert at predicting and anticipating emerging conditions. So what happens when I worked with him, he really impacted my work, because all of a sudden I stopped looking at the world as, the scenery that's driving by me or passing me as I'm in a car, but it's much more volatile. It shifts and it changes. So you look at what are the conditions, and once you start looking and anticipating conditions, you realize how frequently they change. So if conditions are changing and I don't have an organization that is able to change as well, those conditions are gonna sometimes will be in favor of me, but probably equal amount of time they're going to be whipping my butt. So what I have to do is I have to have an agile organization. So I have to identify who is good at what. Everybody has their positions and their pay grades, and that's really important, because the org chart does define what department people work in and what they're responsible for. When the org chart first came out in the early 1900s, it was basically just to communicate who was working in what area and who were the decision makers. It's since turned into, because this is what humans do, our egos get big, it's since turned into a power thing, right? So what we want to do with the org chart is you keep it, because it's a map, but it's not what you manage your organization by. So you have various people, and this is what I work with my clients on, is to say, okay, you're going to come in and you have a problem. Okay, well, the first thing is management unnecessarily feels an obligation to have to solve the problems. And it's well-intentioned a lot of times, but frankly, it's foolish because you can't. So, and nor should you. So what I teach my clients, and it takes them a while to learn it, took me a while to learn it, is look, go to the people who are experiencing the problem, bring them in. Go to the people that are paying the price because that problem exists, bring them in. And then you go in and facilitate that discussion. What do we think it is causing it? What's the impact on it? What does the people who are experiencing the problem, what would make it feel better for them and go away? And communicate and collaborate and facilitate this conversation with your knowledge network, where you're coming up with the best ideas that you can, not only with what people know. There's 4 levels of thought that I talk to people about. It's like a little pyramid. Intellect, which is the stuff that the team already knows. Hey, you know what? I got this. Oh, well, this is how you fix that. Cool. Next idea up is ideas. And that's where I take stuff that I know, but I come up with something new. Cool. Next level is insight. That's flash knowing. I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting trying to solve something, and all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, you get this whack. Oh, here it is. It's like pennies from heaven. You don't even know where it came from, but everybody goes, you know what? That's it. That's different than an idea. And those are really valuable. But then the fourth layer is intuition. And that's where, and I've been in this countless times. I'm sitting there and I love when people are talking around stuff and I can see what's coming and you can kind of get a feel for the energy, what's happening, what's catching, what isn't. And all of a sudden I'll just get a hunch about something. And I'll say, look, I don't know what I think about this, but it's coming to me and I want to put it out. You're getting something intuitively that it could fit. You roll it out there and more often than not, it contributes to it. So what you're trying to do as a leader is you're looking to create that environment of safety, of creativity, and of curiosity to say everybody in here is equal. I mean, we all go home and take off our shoes the same way at night. We're just in here. I'm Mr. President and you're Mr. Dock Worker, right? But together, we're smart. We're smart creatures. So let's create the environment where that's where the network flattens out for a while. And then at some point, you got to go in and you got to bring form to it. And then that's where you come in and you have leadership. You have people that are empowered, that they're held accountable for what it is they need to do. And you need to execute, because without some level of hierarchy, you don't have any form. Without form, you don't execute. Without execute, you don't have progress. But you don't go in that way. You go in collaborative and get that thing going. And then when it's time to move, people will get a sense for it and they'll follow your direction. You know, I don't want people following my directions. I want them following my direction, which is let's collaborate with one another. Let's have this level of consciousness where we work together. And, you know, we're going to throw our elbows. We're going to have our bad days and we're going to dust it up. And then we're going to do bygones and move forward. But that's the essential part of going in and create those spaces. And it's not a safe space, you know, can't be snowflakes. Business is a contact sport. And I know firsthand what happens when you hit, you know, you're spitting gravel for a long time when you crash your business, and it's no fun. So it is a contact sport, but you go in and you create that environment and you get your employee engagement to go instead of 3 out of 10 to 6 out of 10. The profitability numbers on that are staggering. You can go to my website. I've got a white paper in there. It's titled EE equals EBITDA. And that's employee engagement equals EBITDA. And it's a formula I made up. I'm doing all this research. And again, my engineering head, I'm thinking, you know what? There's got to be a way where I can find out how moving employee engagement moves numbers. Because CEOs are number driven. And I ended up putting a lot of time into this. And I came up with this formula and it made sense to me. And to prove it out, I went to the Rhode Island Society of CPAs and I did a presentation in front of 21 CPAs to get them to check my numbers. And I thought, I'm either gonna get smoked and crash and burn, or I might have something here. And after the presentation, about an hour long, they all said that formula works. So it shows you that by moving, if you have a $2 million compensation budget, we'll call it, and if you're at if you move your employee engagement figures by only 5%, you will realize $50,000 extra profit through additional performance and production numbers than what you would have had before. And it doesn't cost you anything. It just costs you maybe learning how to be a better leader and learning some emotional intelligence and how to get organizations to work that way. But, you know, if you're a small business and you move that needle $50,000 of pure profit, that goes into your retained earnings. You do that for like 3 years and then you go to sell your business. Every business has a multiplier to it. So all of a sudden that $150,000, which is real money, that gets hit with a 4 times multiplier, which isn't a high number. That's real money that goes right into your pocket when you sell that business. There's absolutely no downside to increasing your employee engagement because human capital makes financial capital. Financial capital is a lagging indicator of how well you're doing your human capital. Money doesn't make money in companies, people do. Get that right. This is going to show up. And it's hard, but it's worth it. And it takes a different style of leader. It takes somebody who has a different level of consciousness or who wants to get there. And it's not necessarily a type A command and control. And it's certainly not somebody that doesn't like people.
Yeah. That's a lot of the analogies you've used today have been just really good. And I've definitely learned a lot. We are kind of getting towards that time, towards the end of the show. And before we kind of wrap things up, I have one more question for you. And it's as a survivor, as someone who's had stage 4 cancer, how did that change your outlook on life and like desire to even, I mean, like if I had stage 4 cancer and was dealing with that, I wouldn't want to do anything with business. I'd be like, oh, see ya, I'm moving on to something else. How did that change things for you? And what did you take from that? And tell us about how that affected your life.
Tremendously. I consider cancer to be one of the most magnificent experiences I ever went through. And I when I say that, I always say, I don't want it again. Right? Let's be really clear on that. But what cancer taught me about myself as a human, about compassion for others, about what a miracle life is, about leadership. I had to lead myself through so much of that. You know, I had a good support network, but at the end of the day, when you're looking at death and you have that conversation, you know, I tell people it's like, you know, death showed up, spun the chair around, sat down, leaned on it and said, we're going to have a discussion, right? And it's a real thing. And you need to look at that without falling into the rabbit hole. So one of the things that I did, entrepreneurialism helped me deal with my cancer, because I looked at worst case and I put it in that box and I put it on the shelf and I didn't look at it again, because from that point on, my attitude was, I freaking win. End of story. End of story. If no one ever survived that type of cancer, get ready, because here comes the first one.
I love it.
I just locked in with that. And I had neck cancer, and they told me, I don't know this, but they told me that that's the second most painful cancer you can have, treatment you can have without having to be in the hospital. And living through it, I would say, yeah, think of like the worst sore throat you could ever have, 24/7 for months. Couldn't eat. You're getting radiation and chemo. And, you know, I had a period where I started losing my ability to think clearly. They call it chemo brain. And my daughter used to call me chemo sabi, right? But what that taught me was that allowed me to relate to people with Alzheimer's. So without having Alzheimer's, I was able to have the experience of what that would be like. So that gave me a different level of compassion. I lost 40% of my hearing from the chemo. So that gave me compassion for, you know, older people who go, what, huh? What, you know, instead of being frustrated. I was achy and creaky and I hurt all the time. So it gave me compassion for those older people that were walking with walkers. And it taught me to see the human in the human, to love myself, because I was always really hard on myself. And one night I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I had this thought, which was, I had some conversations. I don't know who they were with, but they were conversations. And the conversation was, hey, you know how you feel like you're dying right now? Yeah. But, you know, by this time I knew I was going to come out of it. And, you know, you're going to be healed and you'll be okay. Like, yeah. And well, there's going to be some point in your life when you are going to be dying. And what if in that moment you realized that you were really super hard on yourself and you didn't respect yourself and you beat on yourself more than what you should have because you just didn't have enough compassion? What would that make you feel like? And that I just said, oh my God, I'd feel like I wasted so much of my life. And that conversation really taught me that I really need to love myself, respect myself, hold myself accountable. But I'm a good guy with a good heart that's trying to do good work. And that's good enough. And I'm going to do the best I can. Rumi has a quote that says, I am what I am because this one is like that. And I've got my faults and I have my strengths, and I'm just going to be that with as much grace as I can. And from that point on, I promised myself that I would never be as uncaring to myself as I had been up to that point, because I'm not going to go through all this and die with a regret. And I would have had that, and I wouldn't have had time to turn it around. And I just saw cancer as this magnificent teacher. And that's how I accepted it. And I said at some point, it's going to go its direction and I'm going to go mine. I never really say I had cancer. I call it the cancer experience. And I'm not in remission. It's gone. I'm not saying remission. That says there's a door it can come back in. I win. It's gone. Thanks for the class.
Love it.
That's amazing. Well, and I think it's a real testament to the way that you've been talking the rest of this conversation, right? I mean, there's a real sense of empowerment with you, a real sense of being able to sort of take control where you can take control, all those things, right? So it doesn't surprise me that that's how you handled an illness like cancer. And not that I would wish that sort of thing on anybody, but the fact that you were able to take such a victory lap from it, or you were able to really grow as an individual rather than become a victim of, I think it, really is a testament to sort of you as a human being. And then also just sort of, everything we've been talking about so far throughout the show.
I never considered myself strong. I never considered myself courageous. But, I just look at this stuff and I say, what class am I in? Everything that happens to me, that bankruptcy, that wasn't a failure. That was a class. And if I'm going to pay a tuition like that, I'm going to ace the class. I'm going to make it work for me. Cancer, I'm going to ace the class. Everything, I'm going to ace the class. It keeps me from being victim. And even the strongest person, when they go into victim, they're done. As a kid, I was in street fights. One of the first things they tell you is never get on the ground. Stay, even if you're on one knee, don't go down, because then you're done. And with this stuff, no matter what it is, just keep trying to Rubik's Cube, stay it in the game. Whatever it is that's coming after you, make it hunt you down and take from it. And then you hunt it back and take it back.
Love it.
And you don't have to be courageous for that. You just have to be stubborn and determined, and maybe a little bit angry every now and then. That works too. Get good and pissed off. That'll help you.
Yeah. So, Jeffrey, where can people reach out to get in touch with you? Maybe get a hold of your book and
my website's easy to find. It's jeffreydeckman.com. My email is jeffrey@jeffreydeckman.com. Feel free to email me. I'm very accessible. You can buy my book on Amazon, and my book is promoted on my site. And I have my own YouTube channel that you can go in through the site. There's a ton of short educational, some really cool videos in there about self-respect, about how to resist resentment. Just a lot of conscious leadership type stuff. And I've got blogs and all that type of stuff. So you don't have to pay me. You can go in there and read a whole bunch of that stuff. And just like I educated myself, you can educate yourself on a lot of this stuff. And if you get something really gnarly, I'll certainly come in and help you out. But a lot of this stuff, you put the pieces together, you can help yourself along the way.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks so much for all that. Yeah, no, this has been a really enlightening conversation. Like I said, I personally have had some breakthroughs in the way I was thinking about some of these different hierarchies and structures and stuff. This has been really valuable conversations. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you. And, at the end of the day, we're all humans. We're just doing the best we can. And don't lose sight of seeing the human in the human. And let's work together and move ourselves forward. We all need one another. So
I love it. That's a perfect way to go out. So thanks so much, Jeffrey. We really, really appreciate you being here and taking the time to do this. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And see you guys next time.